All right, I propose we get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on climate risks organized by Carbon+Alt+Delete with the support of Weather Trade Net. Again, very happy to see that so many of you are interested in this topic and are willing to spend an hour in your busy day to learn something new on climate risks. I'm Kenneth. I'm the co-founder of Carbon+Alt+Delete. Carbon+Alt+Delete is a carbon accounting software provider. So we make software to help companies calculate their corporate carbon footprint, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, but then also to properly report on it, set targets, take actions, calculate climate risks, and so on. What makes us a bit special is that we work exclusively with sustainability consultants. So we believe that a lot of companies need to start working on their carbon footprint, but they first and foremost need a sustainability expert to help them with that. And then we are the software provider in the back for that, for those sustainability experts. So that's a quick word about myself and about Carbon+Alt+Delete. Steven, if I can ask you to go to the next slide. Today is not about Carbon+Alt+Delete and our software, but today is on the topic of climate risk. I will be the facilitator today because I'm very happy to have two experts that will do the heavy lifting, Elena and Steven. Elena, can I ask you to quickly introduce yourself to the audience and say a couple of words on what you do at Weather Trade Net?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Steven. Hello, Kenneth. Thank you for inviting me to your series podcast. And so I'm Elena Maximovich, based in Paris, founder and CEO of Weather Trade Net, working on the physical climate risk topics. And we collaborate with Carbon+Delete. Today, great honor to have this webinar for you. Thank you.
Very happy to have
Steven,
you.
yeah. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, very, very nice. And nice to meet you all. I'm Steven from Carbon+Delete, carbon expert at Carbon+Delete, and with my colleague Felix, we are the ones digging in the deeps of all the methodological details. And one of the topics I will be covering today is on climate risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Steven, if you can go to the next slides, because before we dive into the content of today, some housekeeping rules. We're very happy to have a very big audience. The downside of that it's harder to interact face to face or verbally, but we would strongly invite you to put any questions or comments that you have in the Q&A section. So there is a Q&A section in this chat. You will see it on the top bar of your Teams window. Also feel free to upvote questions that other people have and that you think are interesting so that we can focus on the most interesting questions. We know from experience that sometimes the Q&A doesn't work or is blocked by your local team settings. In that case, just feel free to put your questions in the chat, right? We will not be too strict on that, but please try to or engage in discussions through the chat. We have a Q&A towards the end of the session, but we'll also try to already answer some questions as we go over through the hour. The implication of having a big group is also that by default, your camera is switched off and you're always muted. The benefit is that you can follow the webinar in your pajama. So I'm not sure if you do so, but we will never find it out. So voila. Then the next slide, and that's the final slide before I give the word to you, Steven. What is the agenda of today? So Steven will kick off with a quick introduction on why climate risks are important. But number 2 and number 3 are really the core blocks that we want to discuss. The first block, also presented by Steven, is about high-level screening of climate risks. And that is also what we do at Carbon+Delete to help really consultants and companies with their first steps in assessing and quantifying their climate risks. Elena will then in the second half go deeper and really zoom in on physical risks and go very deep in quantification, what it means, how to address it, right? And then I said towards the end, there's a Q&A and we will stop at the hour of 12 or 11 for the people in the UK so that we can be respectful of your agenda. With that, Steven, the floor is yours. Feel free to dive into the content.
Thanks a lot, Kenneth, for this introduction. And indeed, as Kenneth said, I'll first like to have a quicker look at why climate risk matters. And it brings me to, let's say, a first statement that cannot be ignored, I think, is that the effects of climate change are today are unprecedented, and are unprecedented in the fact that are are already in a size that we haven't seen before. I just share a snip of an article of The Guardian where the United Nations states that there are more than 150 unprecedented climate disasters in 2024. And I think we all remember of last year, for example, Los Angeles, but also earlier, the Pakistan floods, or for the Belgians in 2021 at the Vesdre at Valley in Liège and the surroundings. So it is a problem. It is a problem of a certain size. Moreover, at the moment, based on numbers of Lloyd, it was already assessed that only for the 40 richest countries, so taking abstraction of all developing countries where, of course, measuring of these type of things is much more difficult. We already had between 2018 and 2022 an amount of $5 trillion dollars of loss. And to give you an idea, that's really already in the order of magnitude in percent points. So that is already quite some substantial loss on a global level without with only focusing on the richest countries. Moreover, and I think that's really one of the key messages already of today, is that we haven't seen the actual size yet. It will only increase. It will only increase also due to certain tipping points that are very difficult to assess when they will happen, how they will happen. But I would like to already share with you a number that struck me quite some of BCG, where they studied basically the different sectors and what percentage of the EBITDA is at risk, and you can go up to for example, for the utilities, you can go up to 25% of the EBITDA that is at risk. And for me, that's really gigantic. So that's already, let's say, a first statement. And also on the other end of the range, we don't go lower than 5 to 10%. So it's not that we are talking about only some companies, some type of sectors that will be impacted by climate change and the risk associated, but it's really just sector agnostic, a global thing that is coming out there. And the interesting thing is that basically, I think we don't think of climate risk yet in the short term. It's still, if I can share with you these two tables, probably for most of you, these seem, or they are quite familiar. A lot of people share these tables, is on the World Economic Forum, where they basically ask to the businesses, what is for you the top 10 short-term or long-term risk? And then you see consistently that basically climate risk, or let's say I translate extreme weather events to climate risk, are only at the longer term that we basically assess it as a top risk. But on the short term, misinformation and other political or societal risks are seen as more important. Basically, we don't know yet our climate risk. And if I say I speak a bit for the companies, only 1 out of 3 companies include really financial effects if they do a climate risk assessment. We don't plan yet. Only 1 out of 5 has an adaptation plan to deal with that assess climate risk. And a very striking number is the ones that basically only 5% globally has insures basically its assets to climate risk. And most strikingly, of these 5% of companies, only 10% of the total economic loss was basically covered. So it's really a tiny bit that is basically covered by insurance of the total possible economic loss. And apart from the fact that it's substantial, it will only get more substantial in the future. Another contradiction is that there is a clear business case. So if you want to protect your business, if you want to make sure that your business and your competitive advantage is guaranteed, there is a return of investment in adaptation that is really multiples of the investment you will be doing. What can hinder us to act on climate risk? I think there are several things. And first of all, and that's a very logical one, the complexity. It's a complex topic. It needs some time. It also needed some time for us at Carbon+Alt+Delete, and probably too for Elena, to get familiar with the topic, to get familiar with the ins and outs and basically the things that define climate risk. There is unavoidably a discounting bias. We are more busy with the things that happen today than the things that we can discount in the future. There is, and that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge that we see in a lot of sectors related to carbon, but also in the climate risk, there is fragmented data. It takes some effort to combine data, to evaluate data, and to make sure that the data is in the right format, in a consistent format, etc., etc. And a lack of expertise, I think in general, it's still a quite new topic. So it's not that we are yet, for example, at the same level as capacity as we are for carbon accounting, in my assessment. We lack a common standard, quite related also to the fragmented data, and then lack of expertise. And then the ambiguity aversion, a bit related to the discounting bias and complexity. So there are a lot of things that might hinder us, but what interests me more is how you basically position yourself to climate risk. And basically, I would like to get your feedback on whether you have already supported clients with climate risk assessment. As you can deduct from the question, it's mainly directed towards consultant, but feel free if you're an end client to basically, if you were involved with a climate risk assessment, to just say as if you would be a consultant, just respond it that way. So basically there are three options. No, I'm just starting with climate risk basically today. Yes, I have basic experience, no complex exercises, but let's say some high-level screenings. Yes, I have advanced experience, basically the complex exercises, think about the supply chain analysis, etc., related to investment plans on adaptation and mitigation. All right, and then I will quickly share the results with you. See already some answers coming in. Very interesting. I'll still give a few seconds to a minute to give you the possibility to answer, but let's say that in general, there is the majority has basic experience or just starting. So the minority, let's say, is an advanced climate risk assessor. So the things I was addressing or saying before did make a bit of sense. That's already a good confirmation. Good. Let's continue. Check. All right. Let's leave the context, basically the climate risk scene for that for a minute, and basically if we are in general starters, or we have a basic knowledge about climate risk, how to come then to, let's say, a more deeper understanding, come to the advanced experience level. I think, and we believe that there's a two-step process needed for that. Yeah, of course, start, get to know the topic. That's then for some people today. And the first level is go to a high-level basic understanding. That's basically the second option of the survey. In that basic high-level screening, you find hotspots, which are my most important risks. You have an order of magnitude of understanding of the financial effects. You're able, based on that first assessment, to do some climate risk, compliant climate risk disclosure. That these magnitude and these the order of magnitude of financial effects and these hotspots allow you to take some very high-level decisions. And most importantly, you also know where to look further. And that's very much related for me to finding these hotspots. And that brings you basically to then the next step, go to an advanced understanding where you will translate that high-level understanding of your business climate risk to more of a value chain assessment, to very site-specific deep dives. For example, if you have encountered, okay, flood might be an important risk for all of these sites in the Port of Antwerp, then I might consider doing a site-specific deep dive on that plant in the Port of Antwerp. And that should translate, that advanced deep dive, that should translate in concrete adaptation and mitigation plans. We strictly believe that that's really only then you're up to a concrete adaptation and mitigation plan. It's not yet at the level of the high level or basic screen. If we then translate that to the webinar of today, and basically also the position of Carbon+Alt+Delete and Weather TradeNet, then Carbon+Alt+Delete you can situate really at the high level, basic level, and Weather TradeNet really at the advanced level. Good. And that brings me then intimately to the second part of the agenda, and that's then the high-level screening that Carbon+Alt+Delete provides. Start with the basics. Basically, transition risk. Transition risk is really all about the risk that is associated with an economy in transition to go to a level of carbon emissions that is related to the net zero, related to the 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement. That's all related to that. That can be due to carbon taxes, that can be due to energy shifts, going to more renewables, but also to policies, punishments for people that don't comply with certain transition plans, but also mitigation costs from the government to basically go for a certain transition scenario. The second type of risk, the physical risk, that's all related to the actual physical weather-related events that we know of, the river floods, coastal floods, the droughts, heat wave, cyclone, storm, wildfire, etc. Many more that I could add. If you talk about mitigation, that's all related to decreasing your transition risk. If you're talking about adaptation, that's all related to decreasing the effects of your physical risk. As said before, there are many, many more. If we look at different scenarios, let's say this is a visual representation of a 3-degree scenario where basically it's somewhere in between following just our current policies to just even an acceleration of fossil fuel use up until the 1.4 degrees Celsius, which is, as you can see on the steepness of this curve, which might even be already a bit outdated. It's really like the fastest trajectory to net zero in 2050. And then if we look at that, it's very important to understand that transition risk and physical risk are really communicating vessels. So the less we do as a society or from the government or as a company to mitigate our emissions and to basically have a lower physical risk, the higher the transition risk. So the higher carbon taxes need to be, higher speed of energy conversion, higher cost of mitigation will be. On the contrary, the lesser we do, so if we don't invest, we are not imposed carbon taxes, we are not imposed with new energy prices, etc., the likelier and the higher physical risk, like the flooding, etc., will be. So far, on the hazard part, the external stressor of risk assessment. Another important thing or parameter in your risk assessment is the vulnerability. So basically the vulnerability, that's all about translating that external stressor, for example, the flood, or also it also applies to, for example, carbon tax, and basically translating that, as you can see on the x-axis, that physical incident, a certain flood with a certain altitude above ground floor, to, as you can see on the y-axis, to a certain loss, whether it's in percentage or whether it's already in a monetary value. That's the whole concept of vulnerability. And that's also typically, and you will see it, that's typically where your added value as a consultant or as an end company is there in the risk assessment. Hazards, flood risk, a meter of flood. Yeah, that's the same for each company, independent of type of company. This is really where the business specificity kicks in. And if we would look at this vulnerability curve, then basically you have different phases. There is a phase where you basically have no loss. For example, only a few centimeters of flood will not trigger any damage for any business. And you have the other extreme where there is a max loss when the hazard is basically at very high levels. We all understand that if there is a 4-meter flood, most likely all of the value of an asset will be lost. These are not the zones where we need to think of or we need to take a closer look at. The most important zone is, of course, the center of that sigmoid curve. And that's really where we need to make a choice. What type of asset or what type of revenue am I having? So is it something that is really highly vulnerable, low vulnerable, or moderately vulnerable? And what we try to do is to basically set indeed these 3 levels, but also try to relate them to one another. And our basic rule is that, okay, there are different types of revenues and different types of assets. But let's say that if there is an asset with a moderate vulnerability relation between the hazard, the flood above ground floor, and the loss, then it's at 50%. Then the high one must be, the highly vulnerable must be at 90, and the low one must be at 10. That's basically the straightforward relation we're having, to also allow you to basically compare these to another to more in-depthly understand that relationship. Another thing, if we look basically at the central model, so we have tackled what type of hazards you might be covering for a first high-level screening. We have tackled how can I look at vulnerability as a concept, and what are things that I can basically decide upon. In general, a very straightforward model on calculating risk is basically just you have a hazard, you have a vulnerability, and that relates to a certain risk. Basically, for that hazard, we only need a location. In, for example, my hometown, Belgium, Herentals, you need a climate scenario, and you need to know if I'm looking, for example, it might differ between a scenario of RCP 1.9 or just a very net zero by 2050 scenario, or I go for a current policy scenario. That's, of course, a very important variable. So a third one, time horizon. Of course, the impact in the same scenario, same location will be different today than in 2050, and a hazard type. For the vulnerability, that's basically, as shown in the graph, you need to make basically the selection between high, moderate, and low. You can work with smart defaults. And then basically the risk, your exposure, the thing that is exposed is basically the value of your asset or your revenue. For example, if you have a flood and you have the same vulnerability of a certain building, then it does matter whether that building has a value of 10 million or 10 euros. That does matter. So that's really an important input to have your eventual risk assessment. If we look at it from, let's say, a provider point of view, this is typically something that we request from a user to a given location to select a vulnerability level and to insert the value of assets and revenue. This is typically what a provider like Carbon+Alt+Delete will provide for you. And if I then translate again that same formula in 2 concrete examples, how will we then calculate the risk? Then basically, if I look at river flood, you have a certain flood, for example, 2 meters of flood every 10 years. Thinking of that sigmoid curve I showed before, it might, for example, relate to 20% loss for 2 meters for a high vulnerability curve. That relates to 20% of loss every 10 years, or 2% loss if we look at it just from a linear perspective, 2% loss per year. And if I then look to a valuation of 10 million value, then we are really at basically the core, or the key result we want to get is to really get, even if we're doing high level calculations, get to that level of what does it really mean in euros? What order of magnitude in financial effect is that meaning to my business? Same logic applies to carbon. A certain emissions per year for a certain carbon tax relating a certain cost per year. And then if I would say, okay, but all good, these are the potential costs related to a carbon tax, but I know that these prices or that carbon tax is not fully translated to me. I could, for example, select for a moderate vulnerability, and then that gives me 1 million euro per year risk of carbon tax, or 10% per year of a 10 million value, whether it's an asset or a revenue. And that's really the key, the core of our model, is to keep it simple, to keep it transparent, to invite you to think with us on vulnerability, to be able to very simplistically, like I do over here, explain the calculation of your risk. That's really the key points to deliver on that with a first estimate of your financial effects in euros or whatever currency you want to translate it eventually. So in conclusion, for a high-level screening, at the end of that high-level screening, a first level understanding is set. Initial insights, you know which part of the business are at risk. You know, for example, that amount of euros due to flood, that amount of euros due to carbon tax. You can translate, as I said before, you can translate it in an order of magnitude of financial effects, and you're able to think of it in different time frames, in different climate scenarios, which is a very important first step to basically engage in that capacity. I'm convinced that based on that high-level screening, you can already disclose greatly on the disclosures demanded by the CSRD on the first level assessment of your climate risks. And as said before, during showing the slide on the formula, this is for me really key, is to engage your client as it is, transparent as it is, understandable. It is very fitting to engage our client and to understand, okay, this is a type of loss in euros in percentage of my value that I can expect. Of course, as said before, it's a two-step process we believe in, so we don't stop here. You need to refine your understanding and take actions. But the big advantage is going forward, you know your initial insights, you know your hotspots, and you can then basically reach out to more advanced solutions for a further deep dive to eventually come to that investment decisions. And that's basically what leads me to the third part of this webinar, and that's really the part that Elena will be presenting. Okay. I give the floor to you,
okay.
Elena.
Yes, I'm ready. Let's go. Thank you, Søren. Let's go. Let's continue. I will get back to your talk several times. There will be many connections. Okay, do you see my screen? Physical climate risk is not a new concept.
Yes, all good.
All good. Excellent. Okay, let's go.
You're good to go.
Okay, because for some reason I don't see it myself, but it's okay. Okay, let's go. So physical, probably I need to, I'm sorry, I see the slides on the other side. So, but I'm here. Cool, okay, so physical climate risks this topic, it was already the subject for millions of companies during the last decades. Insurance companies, agriculture companies, manufacturing, construction, renewable energies, green finance, green bonds, credit risk. So the number of applications and use case is tremendous. it's not a new topic. It's a topic that was developed in like risk management, climate risk management. This is something that was so a number of models, like pricing models, vulnerability models, climate valued risk, everything exists. So nobody's reinventing the wheel here. Just there is a new scope. The new scope is a corporate sustainability reporting and materiality assessment. So now this use case basically is these applications are also integrated climate risk. But the good news that there is no wheel to reinvent. Everything exists already, and many methodologies can be simply imported from other applications. So the buzzwords here in corporate sustainability reporting and physical climate risk, so share of portfolio at risk, this is the metric which is required to be reported in your corporate filing. So big companies, so asset management listed companies, banks, insurance companies need to provide this metric only in their filings at the end of the year. The buzzwords acute and chronic climate risks. Just a funny thing that if you mention to a climate scientist acute and chronic, they will make big eyes like, sorry, what's that? So yes, it comes from regulatory policies. So basically, for climate scientists, we just call it like flood, drought, right, like with the human names, and scenario analysis. So scenarios are developed by IPCC scientists. They're integrated by International Energy Agency. They're integrated by NGFS group. The baseline for climate scenarios, and those who are really creating them are IPCC group and climate modelers. Thousands of climate modelers work on climate models. Good. Okay, so now getting back a little bit to the idea that I just mentioned before, climate topic is not new. And there were other players already. So within the same company, risk managers, strategic business planners, plant expansion, facility development departments, they were already considering flood maps ages ago, right? So it's not new for them. And now somebody else in the company starts using climate risk. And basically the question is, do they actually align when they are speaking about the risk? When they use the term risk, are they speaking about the same thing? Are they comparing like oranges and apples, or they are speaking exactly about the same problem? Very simple example. On one side, what could happen if they're not using the same definitions of the term risk? The example could be, on one side, the risk manager knows that 7 facilities or 7% of their facilities are uninsurable for flood. Basically, the insurance is asking $500,000 to insure these facilities, and the maximum payoff is $1 million. So it just doesn't make any sense to have this kind of insurance. So they have uninsurable facilities for flood, but on the other side, sustainability department says, no, we don't have a climate risk problem. Flood risk is not material for us. So it should not happen, right? So this is something that there should be an alignment in the definitions, and there should be alignment between the decision process and the compliance and the due diligence. Okay, so there are different sectors, economic sectors, basically all sectors are affected by climate risk directly or indirectly. So if we make something common, so all those companies, they need electricity, they need water, they need labor, they need transport. For them, physical climate risks are material. If at least one of this, so labor, electricity, water or transportation, if you need this for your business, then climate risks are material for you by definition. And here I will get back to, so Stephen just explained the concept of vulnerability and exposure. So from the point of view of the exposure, it doesn't matter what the company is doing. Is it an automobile factory, textile, agricultural? The fact that with what kind of activity they have, it doesn't influence the number of floods and number of hurricanes. But indeed, the impact of floods, hurricanes, frost, storms, heat waves, yes, the impact depends on the type of the activity. So exposure is sector agnostic, vulnerability is sector specific, not just sector specific, it's business specific and specific to the type of the asset, right? So if it's office building or if it's manufacturing site, everything matters for vulnerability. Okay. Now, again, so we are talking about physical climate risk, and it's very interesting to consider a few real examples, real life examples. So what do we know? What is already, what kind of real examples are already in front of us? Here, a small snapshot of big names. Typically, we hear only the big names, right? So whatever the journals, it's also always the big names. Thousands and tens of thousands of small companies, nobody writes about them, but with the big names, you have nice photographs. So here, no, it's actually terrible photographs. When we look at all these skies and the water, my personal question is, okay, why? Like, why they didn't have parking there? When I hear that Porsche lost 4% valuation because two factories were flooded at the same time, Novelis and Constellium in July 24, again, the question is why there was no diversification. When I see Sony factory flooded 3/4, of the factories flooded, right? So up to the roof almost. The question is like, why? How could it happen? Basically, there are few explanations like of this. Of what happened. So first, number one, all these companies in general, they think that they are in safe areas. So if they were provided the construction permit, for them, it's logical that this should be a safe area. And according to official public flood maps, these are safe areas. Just a small number, a very interesting number. So in France, it's 45% of claims for flood every year on average. 45% for flood claims happen in safe areas. In the UK and the US, the number is between 20 and 25%. It means that flood maps are better. They cover better, more areas, flood-prone areas. So every other claim from safe area, it means that there is an issue with flood maps, actually. So it's mostly about that. So yes, if the construction permit is provided, it doesn't mean that it's safe area at all. This is number one. Then official flood maps, very frequently they are updated, and it's the same organization that is responsible for providing construction permits and mapping flood areas, flood-prone areas. The moment there is a conflict of interest, you can logically guess that there is no interest for updating any flood maps at all, because it's a fast source of cash construction permits. Let's be direct in this. Okay, so if these companies, they knew that these are not safe areas, Sony and Toyota and Constellium and Honda, they would not build factories in this area. And then there is another misconception that an insurance term is used in the context of protection. So this was a year ago, I was speaking with a risk manager from Heineken, and basically the argument was, yeah, but what? Like, we have flood insurance. And okay, so there is health insurance and there is flood insurance, two completely different products. Health insurance, it's so basically, if I pay health insurance now, I hope that if in like tomorrow, if I need to go to the doctor, this money is spent for doctors, medicine, and the hospitals and emergency. And yes, it is, because these budgets, they go to the government. Flood insurance, wildfire insurance, it's commercial product. It is not protection. And the insurance companies can stop renewal of your insurance at any moment. So flood insurance, it's the only short-term financial hedging. This money doesn't go in building flood defenses. So you're not protecting anything, but you're not reducing the risk exposure or flood exposure or wildfire exposure by paying flood insurance. Okay, so another very bright example of what happened, and specifically regarding the insurance. So Stephen was mentioning, so 5 billion economic loss by Lloyd's, again, the richest countries. Here, okay, so just California, last year, wildfires, so they evaluated the economic loss 275 and the insured loss only 45. So you see the difference. So the moment when you see the numbers published by big insurance companies, typically they refer to insured loss. It's not economic loss. The economic loss is typically about let's say 10 times more the insured loss. Okay, so 2 months before, this is so during 50 years, people in California, farmers, manufacturing sites, they were paying for their insurance. They had wildfire insurance in their contracts, but 2 months before wildfire started, all insurance companies refused to renew contracts with wildfire mentioned in the contract. So basically, 6 months before wildfire started, insurance companies realized that there is a high risk, and 2 months before they stopped to renew contracts. So the fact that you pay insurance for 50 years doesn't mean that the year when there is a high risk of flood or wildfire, that exactly this year you will have insurance. So this is the argument that I have insurance, it doesn't work really. Okay, 50 people lost their jobs, 18,000 properties damaged. You can imagine that now on, a company is thinking about building factories. So for example, if you asked today Tesla, are you going to build a factory in that area? Probably they already withdraw that area from the potential list of building a new factory there. So for the regional economy, it's a huge impact. Okay, so cost of physical damage, there are other numbers, quite striking numbers in the billions everywhere. So we know, so this is registered, so the big names, right? So there behind each big name, there are thousands of small companies also that failed. Lenovo, Toyota, Samsung, Canon, Western Digital, Ford, Sharp, and just the recent example, so Porsche, 4% valuation loss in 2024 because Novelis and Castellan failed to deliver, so supply chain failed to deliver, and it's not just about sales, it's also about the market share, because the moment when you don't deliver, your competitors, they take your market. So it takes years to build your market, and it takes 1 day to lose it all. So Pfizer, TSMC, Tesla. Okay, with Tesla, factory was delayed. So near Berlin was delayed by 1 year because of drought. And they lost 1 year of production. So 500,000 cars, so 500,000 cars were not produced because of drought. Water restrictions. TSMC, this is an interesting example. You can find it easily if you type TSMC water trucks drought. You will see the number of articles about water trucks. So 28 million were spent for water trucks. So you mentioned already in CO2 emissions, transition risk, scope 1 to 3. So water trucks were transporting water for the major semiconductor factory. During 1 week, there was a lack of water. Only 5% of water was lacking for electronic chip. But in terms of delays and in terms of global economic impacts, the company could not afford themselves to reduce the production. So just for 5% of water that was lacking, not 100%, but only 95% that they had, they basically they decided to add additional 28 million of operational costs for water transportation. You can imagine how many trucks, like to the horizon, right? So how many trucks you need to rent to crash 28 million on these water trucks. Okay, now basically the conclusion is simple. So 24 hours before or 48 hours before something happens, flood, drought, or storm, it's quite late to act. You can't prepare anything decent a few days ahead. You can't evacuate 20,000 cars from Tesla, Honda, Toyota parking. You can't build support so that these cars are not drowning in the water. You can't change doors in the factory. So there should be a proper preparation. It takes time. And if these companies, if they had the time machine, if they could go backwards, a year ahead before floods and these major events happen, probably they should have taken action. And 2 days before, it's too late to set up any plan. In terms of materiality, okay, again, to repeat, so if your company needs water, labor, electricity, or transportation, then physical client risks are material. Physical climate risk, they translate into delays, disruptions, thousands of cars driving in the water. It means their life cycle is 1 day, so CO2 emissions additional. And what is irreversible is the loss of market share. This is probably the most expensive part of the physical climate risk impact. Quick insight. So in order, so Stephen explained already. So in order to start physical climate risk, you need a location. So location for facilities, because all these flat maps is great. It just okay, where is your factory actually? So the moment we have the locations, we can map, and basically the first snapshot is where is the problem within your portfolio. What's the problem there? What's the issue? Is it flood, drought? What are we talking about? Different action rates for flood and drought. And where it is urgent. So which one requires urgent action? So in priority, asset number 1, asset number 2, so that we know exactly from where to start. Okay, so what happened next? Just what could be avoided, anticipated, and so Sony completely withdraw from that location, and I bet that nobody else would like to build any factory at that place. They lost the market share for PlayStation. They didn't deliver, and it takes years to. It's not the equipment that you buy in the supermarket, you know, like for electronic chips. That's what you can get overnight, replace. This equipment takes years to design and to set up. Honda, so more than 1,000 cars were scrapped. Novelis Constellium, they could restart the production 4 months after, but the first thing that Porsche did was the first day when they learned about Novelis and Constellium was diversification. So no more, they cannot afford further to have an undiversified portfolio. So the first thing, and it means that Novelis and Constellium lost their client, right? So or not, they're not anymore the primary client, and they were replaced partially by someone else. Okay, so climate risk and sustainability compliance, it is the opportunity. So sustainability reporting with physical climate, it is an opportunity for companies to identify in proactive manner before something happens, the vulnerable facilities across operations and suppliers. And true preparedness begins years in advance. And again, everything is related. So physical climate risk, transition risk, it's logical that they go together hand in hand. And thank you for our partnership, Stephen and Kenneth. I pass you the word.
Thank you, Elena, for this very nice overview and very timely as well. Thanks a lot for that. That leaves us still some time for questions. I would just take 3, right? I had a look at the questions in the chat. Maybe the first question is for you, Steven, on the vulnerability curves, right? So I'll put the slide back on the screen. People were basically asking, where did we get those curves? How have we composed them? So I'll let you say a couple of words on that while putting the slide on the screen. Yes. Here we are.
I think I also briefly addressed it in a chat. So the first thing is, of course, the steps we follow is first the yellow curve. So first the moderate curve to find the relationship, to calibrate the relationship between a certain hazard and a certain loss of value. And that's typically challenged with data like in the NGFS or data like in open source like Climata and etc. And then basically starting from that calibration, we deduct the high and the low from that moderate curve. So we try to basically make it as understandable as possible by saying, and then you can click one further maybe, Kenneth, then the 10, 50, 90 is also shown. Yep. So basically at the midpoint of the moderate curve, we are at 50% of loss of value. And we say that for that value, then we take it as a condition when we simulate the other curves that for the low curve, it should be 10%, and for the high curve, it should be 90%. As you can see, the colors are switched over here, but the upper curve is the high curve and the lower curve is the low curve. So that's basically what the fixation or the variables we keep fixed to do that modeling. And two second things is that we also say that basically the min and max loss are the same. As I explained, it doesn't matter how vulnerable you are. If it's no flood, then it's no flood, depending whether you have a crippled building or you have a very strong building. The same for the max loss. And we also say that the thresholds, so the minimum threshold, so the highest value somewhere over here, between 0 and 1, the highest value for which there is no risk, or there is no loss rather, and the lowest value on top for which there is max loss, that these are also the same across these categories. And so based on these conditions, we basically model these three curves and keep them relatable, keep them understandable. That's basically how we did the effort.
Thanks a lot, Steven.
Okay,
I think that will clarify. Anyhow, we will share the presentations, we will share the slides, we will share the contact details, both of us and of Elena, so people can always follow up one-on-one. Another question. Yeah, go ahead, Steven.
I also said it in the chat and I forgot to explain it in my explanation, but for us, transparency is key. So that's really, and so all of these things, all of these assumptions that we've made will be shared, will be put on our support page, because it's more important for us that you understand what assumptions we took than that you take it for granted that a sigmoid curve looks like that. So that's really our position. So you will be directed to a support page where all of this is really disclosed.
Absolutely, thanks a lot. A second question that was often posted in the chat is about good data for climate physical risks. I know, Steven, you answered which data source we have used, but maybe first, Elena, on where can people find good data on the risk of floodings on their site, and any advice around that?
Thank you. Okay, so depending on the country, so the national services are doing typically this kind of. So the best are FEMA in the US, Environmental Agency in the UK, in Europe, GRC. Then there are private sources I do like a lot if we're talking about flood. So Fathom, Safer Places. So there are private companies provide GBA providing detailed flood maps, excellent services, excellent data. The difference between private and open data, that the private data is constantly updated, and the goal of private vendors is to identify these flood areas. When I was saying 45% are safe areas, so the goal of this private sources is to identify, okay, which exactly the areas are these not safe areas, which are safe and official public flood maps. So slightly different tasks, and the insurance companies are using private sources. They are using the most updated, continuously updated, the high resolution sources. So yes, Copernicus is the Mecca, let's say, for climate, all climate data in general. It's the reference, it's an aggregator, like Amazon. I don't know, it's an aggregator of different sources of the data. So Copernicus services, they aggregate the international sources, and also those from the European Space Agency, NASA, NOAA, definitely. In Canada, the climate data products are very good also. One more thing, that neither private data source would be available, would even exist if all this public data, if we didn't have all this public data, right? So public data, we could say, like, it's eggs, flour, and sugar for cooking. It's necessary. You can't do anything without this. Just at some moment when clients need instant, efficient, constantly updated, super high resolution products with the support, technical support, this is logical that there are services that arise from that. For tailored products.
Very good.
Was it? And by the way, just on Weather Trade Network, we have documentation, we have technical documentation with a list of different sources. So happy to refer also and to this documentation, which you can easily, freely download on our website as well.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Maybe a final thing that I will say, or final question that one came up was about Carbon+Alt+Delete and climate risk within the Carbon+Alt+Delete tool. So very quickly, 2 points. We will bring that feature live over the coming months, so over the summer months, so that the user of Carbon+Alt+Delete will then see the announcement that they can also calculate climate risks within Carbon+Alt+Delete for the clients that they're supporting. And also important to mention the second point, it's for us part of the package, right? So it's part of the existing license fee. It's not an upsell feature. And the underlying reason is that for us, if you do an end-to-end climate impact assessment of a company, climate risk should be part of that. Why we will not position it as an upsell feature. It's for us part of the basic assessments that US consultants need to do for your clients. With that, in the final minutes, before I let you go, let me say one more thing on what's coming up next, right? So some of you know that we do these webinars every 2 months. So the next webinar will be after the summer holidays for, I hope, most of you. So in September, and will be on benchmarking companies based on their carbon footprint, based on their climate impact. Webinar that will be facilitated by Felix on our side, one of our carbon experts who has been working on that. Kai will put the link in the chat so you can already register for that webinar. I'll also take the opportunity to remind you of the carbon community that we have. So you've seen it in the chat, there is a lot of expertise also available in this webinar. So we invite you to continue discussion on our Q&A form. Again, the link will be posted in the chat. And if you would like to know more about us, Carbon+Alt+Delete, or about Weather TradeNet, we will share the contact details of Steven, of Elena over the email. It will happen over the coming days, so you can always reach out to them to follow up on questions or book a meeting with them. And just to make that very clear, also the slides and the recordings will be shared over the coming days. With that, I think the only thing that is left for me then is to thank you for your time, for your interest, for the interactions through the chat. I wish you a very pleasant continuation of the day, and we hope to see you again in one of the next webinars. Thank you. Bye-bye.